This is something that could last a lot longer. I mean, there's really two sides to the China debate. In our Barclays research, we've talked a lot about this. There's that old economy side, buy more American exports. But on the new economy side, it's this dual-use technology. And it does hit things like mobile communications with 5G, artificial intelligence, robotics, lots of other issues. You're not going to be able to fold them all into the current trade discussion and find a resolution so easily.
Hey, you've been doing business in China with Chinese companies for what, the better part of almost 2 decades now. This report in the journal, the idea that Huawei is littered with accusations of theft and dubious ethics, did that surprise you?
It's surprising a little bit in terms of the accusation. Yes, there's been a lot of, copying and a lot of things that have been happening in China between U.S. and Chinese companies for a long time. But it's nothing new, frankly.
Shawn, if we are in sort of a Cold War in tech between the U.S. and China right now, when it comes to 5G, with Huawei as one of the first incidents, do you end up with the equivalent of containment policy, 2 separate networks or collections of networks? And how can that even practically work in a digital world?
That's a great question. I mean, the U.S., when you use the Cold War, U.S. and Soviet Union didn't trade. I read somewhere they traded $2 billion a year. We trade $2 billion a day with China. So we're in a very different sort of situation. And when you realize the way supply chains work, we're going to have to find a way to work around this. But with the recent orders on these export orders from the U.S., you are seeing essentially a rise of 2 internets, a U.S. Western version and what we see as a Chinese version. Companies have tried to work around this before, but we're in a new normal, really, when it comes to trade in U.S.-China, seeing how the tariffs are playing out and being tied to all the national security concerns.
Hany, we've got reports now that Alibaba is considering listing in Hong Kong. This on the heels of comments from Mark Cuban last week, Steve Bannon, to name a few, suggesting the idea or floating the idea that maybe Chinese companies shouldn't be allowed to go public here in the U.S. Do you think that's a scenario that could actually play out?
I don't think that was a primary driver for Alibaba listing in Hong Kong. Actually, when it was doing its IPO, it was considering doing a dual listing between Hong Kong and U.S. The primary driver was, frankly, that Hong Kong wouldn't allow dual stock or dual class listings. And that's, I think, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange has revisited that decision. And I think that's why Alibaba is thinking about Hong Kong. Frankly, I think a lot of the trade tensions that are going on between U.S. and China and the tit-for-tat kind of movements is more of an ideological issue than it is, frankly, an economic issue.
Shawn, you had President Trump in Japan over the weekend talking trade there. A lot of times we just focus on the dynamic between the U.S. and China right now, but how much could all of these other potential trade deals with other partners factor into how this long-term impacts the U.S.?
That's a great question. The U.S. administration delayed tariffs, or at least a decision on tariffs on European auto and auto parts by 6 months. Given what's going on right now with U.S.-China, we still have to get the USMCA, the new NAFTA, ratified through Congress. So everybody's watching the situation play out with U.S.-China. And it's possible you just won't have enough oxygen this calendar year to get a deal done on Europe, to get the ratified on USMCA, because U.S.-China just takes the rest of the year.
So going back to what you were saying about the digital economy and the flow of information, given the trade between the U.S. and China, for me, it isn't even just an issue of the U.S. and China, because other countries are still going to use Huawei equipment, right, if the issue is the equipment. So is it even possible to sort of X out all the places that have a different standard about what Chinese equipment they're going to use and say we're not even going to accept data from those countries? And if not, what are we really fighting about?
That's a great issue, and the Pentagon is very worried about that, because it's not just about building physical infrastructure. It is about that flow of data. So if you're a U.S. service in military operations in a foreign country and you've got to use a foreign-built 5G network to access American communications, is that like that attack surface has increased substantially? Is that a way you can not just hack the physical devices, but also intercept data flows? That's the real concern. And this is, as the last person mentioned, a big issue of like great power politics. It's the rise of China and how the U.S. can better manage that. And we haven't figured that out. We're in the middle of that right now.
Hany, is there anything in terms of the U.S.-China trade situation right now and things that are transpiring that would make you change the way you're investing?
No, I think there is one case of catastrophic risk. Actually, it could be a contagion across the entire sector. One of the things that's happening is China is really trying to protect itself from social discord. One of the things that they've been pushing off is the ability for social networks to enter China. I mean, technology, from a technology perspective, one of the things they're worried about is technology that basically starts disseminating information and creates the rise of the Chinese citizen, much so the same way that the Arab Spring happened. I think the Chinese government and the Communist Party is really worried about a China Spring. If that happens, it's going to be a catastrophic risk economically for everybody on the planet. And that's the one thing here, I think, in the trade tensions that people are not talking about enough. China has to save face in some way in this trade war, and they have to protect its citizens from what they call social unrest.